Welcome to another Coffee with the Alchemist. Today will be much more effective and efficient than usual. We are going to spend some time talking about the 1 minute workout. Yes, our guest today is no other than Dr. Martin Gibala, a renowned expert in exercise physiology and the science of high intensity interval training, or HIIT. Martin's work has revolutionized how we think about fitness, showing how a short, intense burst of exercise can provide incredible health benefits. We will talk about the nuances of PGC1 alpha as a master regulator of endurance, VO2 max, and impact on performance, and so much more. But you see, the coffee is almost ready, so get ready for a fascinating conversation packed with actionable insights with Dr. Martin Gibala.
Thanks for being here today. It's very a pleasure for me to be here with you. And what time is it in your location?
We are 1:30 in the afternoon.
That's good. It's 7:30 in Central European time. We work offline with a set of questions. I hope to cover the main points. I know that you're quite recently been in a Rhonda Patrick podcast with quite extensive, more than 2 hours long. I don't know how you managed to this load. Go straight into the topic of high intensity interval training. Why you started working in this direction?
Yeah, so I when I first started out at McMaster University, I was a busy young assistant professor. I had a working spouse. We had 2 young children. And so, quite ironically, for a professor of exercise physiology, I found myself with very little time to exercise with all the other commitments of life. So, that personal interest dovetailed with a professional interest. For 25 years, I've taught a course called the Integrative Physiology of Human Performance. And my students are always very interested in the training regimes of high level athletes. And so I would ask them, why do these high level endurance athletes practice sprinting in order to get better at endurance? And so it was a way to introduce them to teach about some of the biochemistry. And so it was those two things meshed together, and that sort of led to a personal and scientific interest in interval training that's lasted for many decades now.
Yeah, yeah. I know. Now I have a copy of your book here, and full of notes that you can see. I think that this is 2017. Is it the first one or is
Yeah, that was when the book was published,
yeah,
2017.
2017? So we can talk later if anything has changed or if uh, you thinking about I know a revision or just an update. Would you change? But let's start because I just following your book. I read about the Wingate test that started I think 2004. The first set, and then you had more set of this test. There is a reason why. So can you tell us why you started and why you changed?
Yes. Yeah. So the Wingate test, very common test in exercise physiology, 30 seconds of all out as hard as you can go effort. And it's done on a special bicycle as well. So people think, well, how hard can 30 seconds be? But it's very, very demanding exercise. And so it was a model. The Wingate, repeated Wingates had been a model in sprint interval training studies. And at the time, there was some research that was looking at if people did 14 sessions of Wingate training every day for 2 weeks, or they spread it out over 6 weeks, some of the physiological responses were the same, but the performance only got better if they had the recovery periods. And so that led us to ask the question, well, what about just 2 weeks of interval training, but we'll add the recovery? And so that led to the design of the initial study, 6 sessions over 2 weeks. We opted for 4 Wingates. and we progressed up to 7. That's still very demanding. So, but that was the rationale for that first study. And so we were, the findings were in the title. That very brief amount was enough to increase mitochondrial capacity and also markedly improve performance, at least in these non-elite individuals. So that was the first study that got
So,
some attention.
so that's why you trigger your curiosity, and then you start thinking, how far can we go in reducing and reducing and reducing, and then we will come back to the reheat protocol after in a while. So it is this when you mentioned the recovery, which is now we know that exercise is a stimulus, so it's something that is initiating and triggering adaptation, the adaptation. So we go back to the general adaptation syndrome, so the gas theory. So is this correct? So is this is the reason why we need to recover after this stressor to the body?
Yeah, absolutely. Exercise is a stress. It's an insult. When we do this very potent, intense work, we have a very marked disturbance of homeostasis, and that triggers responsiveness. So, absolutely, it's a profound disturbance to homeostasis that leads to adaptation.
I'm curious because also I think there is this theory of the speed. We will talk about the rate of fuel depletion,
Yeah.
because we are not talking only about high intensity, but interval training. So the rate, the speed of which we go to the fullest, and then we go back normal. So this is is this correct? So I think you do you think that this is the real this is one of the key factor in the
I,
results?
I think it's an important factor because you're right. What are the things that trigger? We'll just talk about muscle. We have more capillaries, we have more mitochondria, and we know that the triggers for those growth processes include things like low levels of glycogen, increases in lactate, hydrogens, reactive oxygen species. And so I think it's been traditionally thought, or, we generally know, for example, as glycogen goes down during exercise, the muscle senses that lack of fuel availability. That triggers the response in recovery. And so we thought, well, maybe it's not only that you get to some critical level, you reach that, but maybe it's also the rate at which it goes down. You could almost imagine like sensors on an airplane. They sense the altitude, but a sudden drop in altitude might be particularly problematic. And so when we have very sudden drops in glycogen, we know we and others have shown it. You literally turn on and activate these metabolic fuel gauges that then trigger these recovery processes, these signaling cascades that lead to genes turning on, mRNA species being formed to create the new proteins.
Perfect. You get it very, very clear, very fascinating. So is this linked to the PGC1 alpha, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And so PGC1, very important protein, you know, uh, often termed the master regulator, but it's an important protein that is associated with many different mitochondrial proteins. So if we can activate PGC1, you're going to stimulate mitochondrial growth. And many of those triggers we talked about, reactive oxygen species, lactate, hydrogens, have been associated with activating PGC1 alpha.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. So is this trigger, then recovery and adaptation. This is the in short, and going back to your book, and then this 1 minute workout. So we discuss about the efficiency of high intensity interval training, because I speak a lot with people about the high intensity interval training, but we are saying this is not the solution. It's one solution. It's one thing. Then also we talk about the what we would mean with the high intensity. This is subjective, and so is compared with the traditional endurance. We talk about the glycogen storage depletion, which is linear or maybe slowly with the traditional endurance or running or in a treadmill for half an hour, 45 2 hours, versus these spikes of demand. Summarizing the key 4 or 5, I think the main one, benefits of high intensity
Yeah.
interval training versus the traditional steady state endurance.
And so number one, you're absolutely right. HIIT is an option. We're not saying it's the solution, panacea to solve inactivity crisis. It's one more option, particularly for people who don't have a lot of time, don't want to spend a lot of time. And so when we say efficiency, it's really the time efficiency aspect, right? So you can get somewhere faster, more rapidly, or with less total exercise, you can get to the same place. In terms of the main responses, I like to say that the underlying physiology is the same. It's just we can trigger it in different ways. And so, the major improvements would be an increase in cardiorespiratory fitness, that we measure as VO2 max. This is the maximum rate of oxygen uptake by the body. It reflects the underlying capacity of many physiological systems, but mainly the heart, the lungs, the blood vessels to dilate, the muscles' ability to use oxygen. So it's a very good proxy marker of a lot of underlying physiology. And so VO2 max, we know, probably our best predictor of longevity, our risk of developing chronic diseases, even certain types of cancers, but certainly cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes. And the other big response would be muscle oxidative capacity, or that measurement of mitochondria, capillaries. We grow these more in our muscles, and that's associated with better aerobic energy, less fuel. We burn sugars and fats more efficiently, or we produce more energy when we burn those fuels. So, and we talk about, metabolic fitness is mainly muscle fitness, cardiovascular fitness, mainly your heart and lungs. And so with interval training, you can stimulate those things. I like to say, you can get to a similar level with less time commitment with intervals, or for some of them, including cardiorespiratory fitness, for the same dose of moderate or HIIT is going to give you greater benefits. So definitely the improvement in cardiorespiratory fitness when you do more vigorous interval training. I think the data is very compelling to say that that's the best way to optimize the improvement in cardiorespiratory fitness.
Fully aligned, and then we can take into account also non-responders to the steady state. So this is another category that may benefit. And then there are similarities as well with the high intensity resistance training, which is a different training regime, but again is triggering the same things in many places. It's giving other results, so something is very similar. So coming back to the 1 minute workout. So I've seen we will link into the show note to your page with the latest research, something that is still ongoing and something that you recently completed. So what would you add today to this book, based from 2017 to today?
Yeah. So I like to think, there's nothing I would change in the book. I think everything we wrote is still stands the test of time. If there was, a few things change or update, I think I would give more context to this whole notion of what counts as high intensity. In the book, we opted to use perceived exertion as the indicator, because for most, anyone can use perceived exertion and it's highly individualized. But we recently wrote a review in Sports Medicine where we talked more about what counts as high intensity interval training from a health perspective, from a performance perspective, and we broke it down more. So in a health perspective, it's vigorous physical activity, and there's many different metrics for that based on heart rate, RPE, other indicators. In a performance context, athletes talk about training domains, and so we use markers like critical power, maximal lactate steady state. And so I think I would give a more fulsome definition of HIIT, including making this point that it's not one single thing. We can't just say that 80% heart rate max, that's it for everyone. And I think that's a more accessible format then for people, because it depends on your context, health, performance, what you're able to measure. So that would be probably the change or the update that I would make. And then the other updates would just be there's just more and more evidence coming out supporting things that we stated in the book. So we were just getting into this notion of exercise snacking, stair climbing exercise, body weight style exercise. There's just more studies supporting that. So the evidence base is growing. And also, I know we'll talk, or I think we'll talk about it later, this idea of VILPA. There's emerging epidemiological data to show that 2 minutes of daily vigorous physical activity is associated with marked reductions in all-cause mortality. So I think you're seeing the original scientific studies are growing in scope and number, and you're seeing epidemiological support for this, and it's sort of starting to converge even more. So the evidence base is just growing and growing, I think.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Again, the basic human physiology is the human physiology. So and having the support and more and more confirmation that this is correct and there are things that are aligning is great. So and we already talk about the impact on health span and longevity from a cardiovascular point of view, and we are talking about the minimum effective dose. So, and because I think one of the last is in PubMed now, or is, I don't know if it's still completed, is perspective of low frequency intensity interval training once per week, as an effective and sustainable and exercise strategy to tackle the obesity pandemic. So is what's your take in about the minimum effective dose at this moment with your knowledge today?
Yeah. So we definitely know, and we knew even at the time of the book, a single weekly bout of high intensity interval training is associated with lower all-cause mortality. So there's good data now. That bout was about a half an hour long. It's the classic Norwegian of 4x4 with some recovery in that. So, but we know even a single weekly bout that lasts about 30 minutes in total is protective, if you will. I think, we also know that 2 or 3 bouts a week, also totaling about a 30-minute time commitment. So maybe that's 10 minutes of vigorous exercise in a 30-minute time commitment. We know that's also beneficial. And so now I think we're curious about these exercise snacks, like literally if people do, 2 minutes a day, but so minimum effective dose is probably 2 minutes a day of vigorous, adding up to 15 to 20 minutes a week or so of vigorous, maybe as low as 10. That's about as low as you can go. And there's data to show health benefits. Now, no one is suggesting, I don't think, that that's going to provide you with all the benefits of the physical activity guidelines, but it's certainly enough to move the needle on certain metrics.
Perfect. Yeah, because we know that the guidelines still the guidelines are not talking about high intensity. They are talking about moderate, where vigorous. So I think also the more you is not the better. The more I mean, we know also for in terms of resistance training is the same story. So we have the return of investment in terms of time and efficiency is less and less. It's great to know that one single session per week is good in terms of prevention, because we are talking about exercise as medicine. Like we already touched base a little bit the high intensity interval training fitting into the public health recommendation for physical activity. And but I had some question, because you already touched a little bit about the RPE. So is because when people listen to high intensity interval training, they are a little bit scared. So they feel like a high intensity is that's it. So you please give a little bit of feeling on what is that linked to what you already said earlier, and how people can start incorporating high intensity interval training into their routine.
Absolutely. So I think, high is that problematic term.
Yeah.
I think number one, people should think high means vigorous, right? So vigorous, as we talked about earlier, well defined in a health context, very clear metrics. So think about, you need to get in that, maybe, a better term would be vigorous intermittent exercise. So that's where you want to get to. And to your point, already well accepted and recommended in the public health guidelines, right? We should all be doing moderate to vigorous. And so in that thought mode, high intensity interval training is currently part of the guidelines, or it's one option that the guidelines incorporate. Also importantly, vigorous for you, right? And so for a high level endurance athlete, a HIIT session might be sprinting uphill on a steep treadmill incline. For a very deconditioned person or someone starting out, it's brisk walking on the flat. So the relative stress can be the same, even though the absolute workloads are dramatically different. And so I think that's where people don't need to be afraid of interval training. There's just so much research showing that it's been applied to individuals with cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, older individuals. So, but again, properly scaled to starting fitness and individualized. That's really the key.
Yeah, you mentioned the older individual, because we are talking about high intensity. It does not mean plyometrics. So you don't need to jump and do whatever is a cross-fitting style. So you can adapt to the elderly in a way that for them is intense enough and vigorous enough to reach the goals and the results. So that's very important point. And we go back now to VILPA, because I heard the first time, I think not so long ago, from you about with VILPA, and I was really curious to understand what does it mean, and why is now you mentioned, and there are studies, I think in Australia, but there have been, and there are still. So can you please give us a little overview of what is VILPA and why it's important?
Yes, and a general problem with this whole area is lots of acronyms, right?
Yeah.
HIIT, MIC,
VILPA.
anaerobic speed
Sit.
reserve, VILPA. Please just simplify it. So, but you can think of VILPA as the non-exercise equivalent of an exercise snack. And so what I mean by that is VILPA is vigorous. So now we have a very good understanding of vigorous. Intermittent, right? So interval based. Lifestyle physical activity. So not structured exercise. This is just activities of daily living. Like let's say we met in person today, I would have had to walk or somehow get from, take the subway to your recording studio. And I get out of the subway and I can take the lift or the elevator, or I can vigorously go up the stairs. That's not structured exercise. It's just I can choose in that moment, in that activity of daily living, to pursue some vigorous work. And so that would be an example. Or you get off an airplane after a long flight, you can take the escalator, or you have a heavy backpack and you can climb the stairs. Choose to engage in the vigorous effort. As you play with your children, you get off a bus. All of those are examples of VILPA. Carrying heavy groceries out to the car. Choosing to engage in that sort of physical activity within your everyday life and getting into that vigorous range. That's the type of concept that we're talking about. And in studies, and you're right, this is very much led by a colleague at the University of Sydney, Emmanuel Stamatakis, we were able to do a large scale study where we followed a large number of individuals, over 25,000 individuals over about 6.5 years. And these individuals had worn accelerometers. So you could try and get a sense of when they were doing vigorous activity. And all of these people self-identified as non-exercisers. So they didn't see themselves as structured exercisers, but just as they went about their day, periodically, many would engage in vigorous activity. And as little as 4 minutes a day of VILPA type activity was associated with 25-30% reductions in all-cause mortality, larger reductions in cardiovascular disease mortality. That's not cause and effect evidence, it's correlations, but in large numbers of individuals. And there's been a number of studies like that coming to the same conclusion over the last number of years. And it's because you're able to rely on accelerometry-based data
Mhm.
rather than traditional just question and answer. You'd ask people to recall what they were doing. So really compelling data, I think, around VILPA.
Yeah, that is great because again, people are linking exercise. Like I go to the gym, I exercise. If I don't go to the gym, I'm not exercising. This is the definition. Yeah, in the physical activity, we know walking is beneficial as well, but is spreading the word about VILPA is very important because myself, yeah, you need to be a little bit more mindful during the day because yeah, while you walk, you overthinking maybe, but if you start having this mindset, when you see the stairs, okay, see, now I take the stairs and I sprint a little bit safely. I just walk a little bit faster. So this is Vilpa. So and only this little small choices during the day they are changing in the long run. This is very important because you don't need just to go. And then also for sedentary behavior, this is a very bad thing. So during the day, sitting the entire day, breaking with some vigorous activity is a plus.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah,
think VILPA, exercise snacks, those type approaches, it may be a double benefit. You're getting the benefit of the vigorous physical activity, but as you say, you're breaking up prolonged periods of sedentary behavior, prolonged sitting, which is also beneficial for us. So, many people set a timer on their smartphone or on their fitness watch to buzz every hour. Give yourself these little prompts and reminders. As I'm talking to you right now, we could both get up and do a series of air squats
yeah.
at our desk and practice an exercise snack right now, and it would be good for us, right? So when we're done the interview, we'll both go and do that.
Yeah, but yeah, I will do. And I beside that, I developed one mobile app I will share, but it's completely free, and it's basically around this concept of a
Yeah,
Pomodoro technique for productivity. And in between this productivity and focus time, you have this small exercise, even stretching depends.
excellent.
And yeah, this is important. And just to a clarification, when we talk about breaking what I'm talking about, breaking the job, the sedentary job, and to do something, this is exercise snack, right? The vilpa is more that you doing something in your daily life and then you integrate the vigorous
Yeah,
intensity. Yeah, this
you're
is
right. They sort of merge or overlap a little bit, but you're right. The
yeah,
key, so exercise a component of physical activity, but what sets exercise apart is sort of it's planned and structured. Intentional. You
intentional.
do
Yeah.
it. Whereas physical activity is you just as you're going about your day. You're absolutely right.
If you have a mindset and a mindfulness for the physical activity, you do more often, will be just no, you don't think about it anymore and will be part of the daily living. This is very important, I think. So yeah, we talk about already. We talk already about the elderly population, and I was curious to understand. I have a question about chrono exercise because I have seen a study quite recently, controversial, but there are many. So that there is an impact of the power of when we know that we all have chronotypes and the effect of time during the day and the exercise. What is your what idea or take about this?
Yeah, so I think definitely there's something there. I think in an ideal world, we all know our own chronotype and we align our exercise patterns with that. So it's definitely real, I think.
Yeah.
But in a bigger picture, I don't know that it matters for most people because, let's say I could tell you that, what, if you exercise in the morning after an overnight fast, you might burn a few more calories from fat or that aligns with your chronotype
Mhm.
better. But if you're just not a morning person, you hate to exercise in the morning, or you have commitments in the morning, it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter. So I think consistency overwhelmingly is the key. So find something you like and enjoy,
Yeah.
be consistent with it over the long term. And if you already get to that point and you want to further tweak or enhance, yeah, then maybe try and align it with your chronotype or a meal plan around that, right?
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
uh to optimize. But that's sort of the icing on the cake. It's not the make
Yeah.
sure we're physically active, make sure we're sleeping right, make sure
Yeah.
we're eating right. Those are the big basics.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we can tweak or optimize from there.
Yeah, fully aligned. That's why VILPA is also interesting, because you still have a life, you still do what you do, and so having VILPA is very important. I'm fully aligned. For instance, recently started using VR, virtual reality, to work out. Just as a novelty, is nice, is funny, is still with using my watches, etc. I was not. I go into the vigorous. Okay, there are different zones here, and then depending on the watch and the model, uh, without even knowing. Use a treadmill, for instance, or a stationary bike. Maybe because it's more boring, or my mind is focused on pedaling or running.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel more the pace. We are going back to RPE. So my for me is quite okay. It's intense, but looking now after at the data, I see my heart rate is going up in almost the same way when I do other kind of
Yeah.
exercise. Yeah,
I know, I agree. I'm a committed exerciser. I'm going to build it into my day. But I
yeah,
think my favorite workout, and I don't know if it's play or exercise, every Friday I have a weekly ice hockey game with some colleagues.
yeah.
And it's fun, right? So we get out and play, and an hour goes by of very vigorous effort. Then we often go to the bar after and we have a beer together. It's a nice way to end the week. But I think that is, yes, I'm getting exercise in, but I'm engaged in play with my
Yeah.
friends. It's a mental break. And so, back to this idea of making it fun and enjoyable, find something you like. Dancing can be a form
Yeah.
of vigorous physical activity. People don't want to exercise at all,
Yeah.
but they like to dance. Okay, great, right?
Yeah.
That's your outlet.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, fully aligned, and then you add this component of social in your end of the week, which is also linked to longevity, and we know that the part of social life is important. So we are almost at the end, and I'm asking the most recent studies or the most recent things that are ongoing. If you can
yeah,
tell us something that is coming soon, or it's just handed, so just for the
sure.
audience. Yeah.
So we are very interested in this idea of exercise snacking. Right now, there's small laboratory-based studies where we bring someone into our laboratory, we sort of control what they do for 6 weeks, we motivate and test them in the laboratory. That's very different from the real world.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
in these studies, we're trying to uh, examine exercise snack interventions in the real world. Like we've partnered with a company that developed an app so
Hmm.
people get smartphone reminders. Hey, it's time for your exercise snack. They press what type they want to do. It takes them to a YouTube video. They can do these at home or at work on their own. And we're asking, and we have people, they're wearing accelerometers and heart rate monitors at home or at
Hmm.
work, because we want to see, can they self-select to get into that vigorous range
Yeah.
for a minute, because we think that's very, very important.
Hmm.
Then we just bring them into the lab before and after 3 months
Hmm.
to test their VO2 max and their blood. Some of the studies right now, we're doing trials in individuals with type 2 diabetes, and they're wearing
Hmm.
continuous glucose monitors. So these are, we think, advancing the field because, number one, these are rigorously designed,
Hmm.
multi-center, randomized controlled trials. So, not small proof of concept studies in the lab. These are RCTs
Yeah.
and with colleagues in British Columbia, and also in the real world, or at least outside of the laboratory. So that's one line of research that we have right
Hmm.
now. We're also very interested in the idea of why do people respond so differently to
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
interval training? We give 100 people the same program. Some thrive, some don't respond at all.
Hmm.
And so we're playing around with some of these concepts like critical power. If we can
Hmm.
identify critical power in individuals, which is a more metabolic threshold, it can occur over a very broad range of heart rate and VO2. That's
Hmm.
another issue. We're also interested in the biological sex differences. We
Hmm.
know there's some differences, but
Hmm.
are those just individual differences? Are these true biological differences? between males and females. We're interested in that question as well.
Clear. And so where can we find the latest research? Is on your website?
Yeah, so I definitely have a link on my website to our latest research studies. I try to put up links to studies where we have open access, so people could read a recent review to get some updates on this. I have linked to media interviews, podcast interviews like this, so people could listen to latest podcast interviews. That would be a good place to start.
Perfect. I will share everything. I think I have a last question because it's more a curiosity. When reading your book and talking with people, because okay, we go back a little bit to VO2 max, and in your book there was somewhere written exercising at 100 more than 100% of VO2 max, which people some ask. So is VO2 max? Why? How is possible we go over? So can you please resolve this
Yeah.
problem?
No, it's a great question,
Yeah.
right? If VO2 max is max, how can you
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
above VO2 max?
Yeah.
It's a very good question. And so what it is, when we do a progressive exercise test, so you get on a bike and we increase the workload gradually over time. At some point, when we're measuring your oxygen uptake will level out. So you reach a workload where your VO2 just can't go higher. Your body can't take up any more oxygen. And so by definition, that is your VO2 max. But you could still exercise for very short periods of time at workloads above that, right? So you could still go and sprint very hard for 10 more seconds at a higher workload, even though your VO2 max will not change. So what it's really referring to this idea that the actual workload setting could be higher. You can sprint at a pace or workload that's higher than VO2 max. So that's where the confusion comes into play. Athletes will talk about maximal aerobic speed and maximal sprint speed. And there's a big difference between those, right? So that's where the confusion comes in.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. And do you think there will be adaptation over time that the VO2 max increase? Okay, if you
absolutely, yes, for sure, right? So
okay,
yes.
perfect. Thanks. Do you think you want to cover anything else? Or do you think we cover the basics? Then we will see in the future another.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity. It was a very engaging conversation. I think you hit on lots of key points. I appreciate the shout out for my book, but no, I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks so much, Martin. So we will be in touch when I publish the podcast, and I wish you the best. And then I will link everything into the show notes.
Okay, great. Like I say, man, it's I appreciate your interest in my work. You clearly did your homework, and so I thank you for that. A nice, engaging interview and conversation. I really appreciate it. I'll send you because I noticed in the show notes. I'll send you a link to those more recent papers that are these reviews on various topics. And again, they're all open access. So if people wanted to read those, and if you need anything else, please just ask, and I'll send it through. Okay.
Perfect. I will take some time to
Of course.
cut and paste and everything. So okay, thank you. No rush. Thank you again.
Okay,
Have a good
nice
one.
to meet you.
Nice
All
to
right,
meet
take
you,
care.
Martin.
Bye now.
Okay,
Cheers.
bye.
Did you like this episode? If so, simply subscribe, thumbs up, and click on the notification bell not to lose any opportunity in the future. And remember, sharing is caring, even for a coffee. Even better. Till next time, see you soon.